Amina Salihu, who is Program Officer at MacArthur Foundation. Thank you very much.
Many thanks indeed. And may I crave your indulgence because I have a croaky voice, but I come with a full heart, and I hope that will compensate for the state of my voice. I'd really like to thank all the speakers that went before me, because context is always queen, and no two countries are the same. Yet there are lessons that we can learn from each other and from what's happening in our society. As you've heard, I work with the MacArthur Foundation office. One of the lessons that we have learned, and which again resonated for me with the conversations we've had today, is about the way in which we engage with resources, the way we use our every resource, our human resource, our time, our financial resource, even more recently, digital opportunities, inclusion in that space, and how the theme of waste continues to resonate because we do not maximize all of these opportunities. The UNDP representative said that we're always looking for help, whereas we have a lot of opportunities that we can actually move from the potential to the kinetic, but we're almost always at that stage of the potential, and that bothers us about the issue of waste and the way we use resources. Second is the way, therefore, that we have chosen to apply resources for Nigeria, and that is really to support Nigerian-led effort, because no number of development partners can change the fortunes of this country. It's only going to be led by Nigerians themselves, because this is our country. This is the only place where we can see ourselves as first-class citizens. Anywhere else we go, no matter the status we have, we would never be called first-class citizens. So this country continues to matter. It is why, since 2015, we have invested over $200 million in this country, supporting Nigerian-led effort, especially to reduce the issue of corruption and ensure that there's participation, but also greater awareness from the bottom up, because it's always about the bottom of the pyramid and it gets left behind. And one key lesson that we have learned is in the fact that support for investigative journalism matters. And I make a distinction between investigative journalism and everyday media, with all due respect, because you get a lot of sensationalism, you get a lot of anecdotal reporting, and that is not investigative journalism. But for people who have the tools and the courage to look power in the eye and say, these resources are being misappropriated and they need to be redirected. And that work is very important, but it doesn't come easy. And having support for that kind of work is something that the MacArthur Foundation believes is important and needs to continue to happen. And that is no more, yeah, you can go ahead. Thank you very much. That importance has been even more underscored from the keynote presentation and the other presentations that have been made today, starting with my brother, Rotimi Sankore. And I would like to pull out three key things that tie all of this together for me that I would want us to take away from this conversation in the room today. We've talked about the 2023 upcoming census, and that is so important to have data, to be able to plan as we have been told. But we also are at a point where we need to begin to look at the data in different ways and to gather new kinds of data that we never thought was important, especially when we're thinking about equity and inequity. And one of that is exactly the way in which we define work. Because a lot of the time, the perception of work is that it is work that earns money, that earns income. And that is where the inequality persists. Because the work that women do, the work that children do in the home that do not earn any money, but without which we cannot have productive work, is exceedingly important. And without a freeing up of women's energy and time and attention to do other things, we would never have development. And so that demographic dividend that we're hoping for, that demographic dividend might become a demographic doom, because the women will continue to raise those 7 point something on the average children, and we would have more children and more women and more young people, but because we have not made right investments, we're not going to have the development that we seek. So paying attention to unpaid work and ensuring that access to family planning, control over bodily integrity for women and girls is very important. Second is the quality of our education. We have to rethink education, not just as something that goes on in the classrooms, but things that have to happen even from the home. How are we raising our boys versus our girls? If we're raising our boys to think that they are superpowers who can oppress our daughters, and we're raising our daughters to be more aware and more respectful and more conscious, then we're really just setting them up for a future with boys who become men who are not their equal. And we're going to have a persistence of inequality, because our daughters will be very self-assured, be very self-aware, and they're going to be saddled with boys who have been raised to become men who are self-entitled. Now, we need to pay attention to the way we raise our boys. And I salute the men amongst us. I see many of them in the room who are raising their boys and their daughters to be the equals of each other. And I say this because even though it's a public space, and that tends to happen in the private space, there's really no distinction in reality between what happens in the private and what happens in the public, because the two are interconnected. It's the same individuals who cross these so-called divides. And so what happens at the home has import for what happens in the school. And education does not begin in school. Politics for women does not begin in school or when they say, I want to run. It begins from when we are born. It begins from when you are named female and you become a girl. So attention to what happens at that level matters. The third thing that I'd like to speak to is that the solution for Nigeria would need a political economy approach. As we're thinking about the politics of it, who gets to go to school, who has voice, who does not have voice, it's important to also think about the economics of it. If you have 33% unemployment, that is very serious. Hunger is a very serious matter, and consumption is autonomous. Whether you earn an income or you do not earn an income, everybody needs to eat. Only 15% of women have control of the money they earn. What do I mean by that? Only 15% have a bank account. In this age and time of financial inclusion, if you can't control your income, you would only be doing the work for someone else who takes away your labor, which you have spent your entire years doing, and somebody else is enjoying the fruits of your labor. So how do we use the new opportunities emerging, including a media and journalism space that is aware, that has access to data, that is able to use that to tell a story? How do we bring out our game changers? And one of our leaders in this country, Obieze Kwesili, has always told me something. There are 3 game changers we need to pay attention to, and I totally agree. Young people, our keynote speaker has said that. Women, my brother Kayode has, Sankore has referenced that. And third is technology. But technology in itself is not going to change anything. It's only going to bring about change when it is in the wrong hands, and it is being used in a way that addresses the gaps that already exist. Otherwise, it can actually even exacerbate that gap. How do we use technology to address hunger? How do I, as a farmer, have access to drones that help me understand the weather, that help me deal with disease, that helps me plan ahead? How do I get the insurance that helps me ensure that if I grow this food, whatever happens, I have someone that has my back? Without that trust, without those opportunities to life-changing tools, even government cannot make a difference. And if government cannot make a difference, you cannot have governance. And if you cannot have governance, we cannot have development. So putting our money where our mouths are is really what is going to happen. And not just the colleagues in this room, but every one of us who is Nigerian and friends of Nigeria would have to bring up our A game to the table, as it were. I rest my case.
Let's go to the next specific question.
Thank you very much. I'll try to respond to question my brother Chiki and my big sis Professor Reni had posed about who Nigerian friends are, and to thank again my sister Unamula for the very honest response she's given. Rhetorical political question, because we all know who our friends are and we know who our non-friends are, and we even know those who are sitting on the fence, who haven't quite made up their minds whether they are our friends or they are our enemies. But when I look at the MacArthur Foundation that has been in this country for over 30 years and has its DNA in supporting child survival and maternal health, and in 2015 decided to ask Nigerians, Nigeria, what is it that matters the most to you after more than 20 years of doing this work? And Nigerians told MacArthur Foundation that, it's important to us that we have accountability, because in every sector we look at, we see our resources being misappropriated. And that private foundation, an American private foundation with over 8 billion in endowment, then puts its money behind Nigerian-led energy to do exactly what Nigerians want. And some of those grantees, I think of the 5 that my brother Sankore called out, 4 of them are grantees of the MacArthur Foundation as awardees today. It tells us who our friends are. Our friends will be those who allow us think and do the things that matter the most to us, like my sister Vanessa said. What is it that really matters the most to our community? What is it that benefits us the most? Those are our friends. Our friends and the people who would allow us ensure that we follow the money and we're able to ask the hard questions, like my brother Martin has said, because investigative reporting continues to be important, but not everybody is funding investigative reporting because it's super dangerous, it's super expensive, but somebody needs to do it. Now, we ourselves need to be the friends of ourselves and the friends of each other, because nation building is not something that is going to happen overnight. And change will happen. In fact, that's the theory of change in Nigeria. When you throw everything at Nigeria, when you do everything you need to do, change will only happen in incremental steps. And it is happening. It's our duty, therefore, to guard some of those changes that are happening positively, but also to continue to find the courage to speak to those things that ought to happen and they are not happening. And there are times when it is important to look at the government in the eye and beat the government hard. But it's also important sometimes when things are working for us to see that things are working. Because unless we're able to bring a dimension of solution journalism to what we're doing, we would never celebrate the small gains that we see happening. And then we burn out. And when we burn out, we don't even have the energy for the longer work ahead. So as we are critiquing, it's also important for us to celebrate the gains that are happening within our communities, within our ecosystem as media and journalism actors, and even within our families. It's important that I keep returning to that, because for me that is where politics begins. And I'll close by saying that there's certain questions that we should not even ask development partners. I say this because this is my safe space. I'm a political scientist, but I've always been around people in the media, and so I see a lot of friends in the room. There are certain things that are the responsibility of our own governments to fix, and we should be asking them that question. Why would I want to ask UNFPA about security? Why? It's not their monkey to feed banana. What is MacArthur Foundation's business in ensuring that ICIR does an investigative report for Nigeria? We can bring the money, but it's not our business how the Ayato wants to do his work. We should not get involved. And when we cede the space, when we refuse to do our own part, then you know what happens. You already have a cracked wall, and ant-infected faggots will certainly come in. We need to do our part before we point the accusing fingers at others. We have to be each other's friends. We have to be our own friends, and then others can begin to see how they can be the best of friends to us Nigerians. I rest my case again.